I'm Mariano Pensotti. I'm a theater director based in Buenos Aires, in Argentina. I'm part of the Grupo Marea, which is composed by Mariana Tirante, she's the set designer, Diego Weiner, the musician, Alejandro Leroux, the light designer, and Florencia Wasser, the producer. We work together as a collective, working in different projects. Sometimes we work in sort of traditional stage performance, and in other cases we tend to work with site-specific interventions and different other formats such as films or performances who are a little bit more on the boundaries of traditional theater. I think Diamante, it's a very, very special project for us for many different reasons. I wanted to explore the idea of to tell the story of a town, the story of a village, through the story of their inhabitants since a long time ago. I think I was dealing in previous project with how much the history of the place where we live in has an effect on our private life, and in which sense the private life of the inhabitants of some specific place transform the bigger collective story. I've been dealing with those issues in previous pieces in a smaller scale. And then when the idea of creating Diamante appeared, it was like the perfect timing and the perfect frame to put this big storytelling, to try to make this sort of 19th century novel live, and to try to tell the story of a place through time. I was very much interested in to see how much a place can change during several months, during several years, and to make a fiction with that. And then, of course, it was a trigger of the company towns. Diamante is not just any town, but it's a company town. You know that company towns are these places who are owned by a private company, where all the people who live there, they work for the same company. They work in the same company, and so that means that you're living next to your boss, next to your employee. And they started as a nice capitalist utopia because the bosses, the owners of the factories, they wanted to give better living conditions to their workers. But eventually they developed into a different model, more sort of an exploitation town, where people are not leaving the working space anymore. And for me, it was interesting to see that after so many years, because company towns were very popular during the 19th centuries, not as much on the late 20th century, but now they seem that during the first years of the 21st century, they are on trend again. Because you have these big technological companies such as Google or Facebook who are building very hipster company towns in California, while at the same time they are working with other companies who are building a different model of company towns in China or India or Mexico, much more in the model of an exploitation town. So in a broader sense, this idea of a secluded city or a gate community of people who works together and live together, and that seems to be a nice utopia, but then slowly turns into a clear dystopia, it was something that it was extremely appealing for me. And then for the group, of course, the size of the project, it's the biggest that we have ever done. Not just in terms of the number of actors or the size of the set, but more in terms of the storytelling or in the conceptualization of what we wanted to achieve with it, and in the relationship with the audience also it's a sort of a durational performance. It lasts 6 hours. So the things that happens during those hours and the relationship that the fiction established with the spectator, it's quite different than our previous projects. I think it's going to be quite unique and different here in Berlin. Of course, when we presented for the very first time, the piece in Duisburg, it also was very meaningful, also because if you think about the Ruhr area, it has been very much influenced by the concept of company towns, and the relationship in between the towns and the factories. It was extremely strong. So for us to perform this piece there, it was very meaningful. But then also, if you think about this piece as a sort of machine that also creates fictions, which it is from my perspective, it's not just the story of a town, it's not just a sociological study about a company town, it's more like a machine that creates more and more fiction and tells the story of a lot of different inhabitants, and then you can make like a sort of big puzzle of the story of a town. To represent that that performance in the context of a more traditional theater in a place full of fictions, it really makes sense. And also, I mean, without spoiling too much what happens in the performance, one of the central things that happens in the life of Diamante, the city, is that at a certain point it starts to become not just a regular city, but more a sort of a theme park of itself, a sort of a representation of what it used to be. So the whole idea to make a representation of a real city in the frame of a theater, of a theatrical venue, for me is extremely relevant. So I'm really looking forward to see what is going to be the impression of the people here. Mm-hmm. I think Berlin, I mean, it's always difficult to make an opinion when you are a foreigner of a place, because it's always an oversimplification. But it's true that the first time that I came here, it was 15 years ago. And the impression is that the city has changed quite a lot. You can really feel the gentrification and how the city is in certain areas expelling the original people who was living there a few years back. And definitely it's one of the cities that probably is changing the most in recent years, if you think it worldwide. So also to make a presentation of the story of this town who's changing into a direction who's not exactly clear what's going to happen with the original inhabitants of the town in the near future, I think it also adds an interesting layer here in Berlin. I think I was very much interested in this sort of dissociation in between narration and representation. One of the characteristics of Diamante is that you have a mixture in between scenes that you are seeing live performed with the actors and actresses, and then you have text projected all the time on top of them as a sort of a voiceover or as subtitles in a movie. So that allows me to try things that they were more difficult to try in a sort of more traditional narration or in the way that I was producing theater for the stage before, because it gives me the chance to get deeper into a sort of more literary storytelling about the characters, and to make this contrast in between what they are doing live and what we are telling about the characters bigger. In that sense, I truly believe that sometimes it resembles to come to read a big novel live together. I mean, it's strange because we always are saying that Diamante is quite cinematic, and it's true that if you come here, you will notice that it looks like sort of a movie set where the spectator is like the camera and the editor, because they are free to move around the town. They can select the orders of the scenes that they are going to see. The piece is composed by several short scenes that are repeated several times. But then it's up to the audience to decide the combination. So the sense of totality is going to be quite different for each person. So in that sense, it's true that it resembles to being inside a film live. But on the other hand, I see it as a quite literary experience, because you have to read a lot. And the written text, the written words, it was something that I wanted to explore from a technical director point of view. And then we have this strange and I think interesting mixture in between different cultures and languages and traditions of acting as well, because one of the particularities of Diamante is that it's supposed to be located in the north of Argentina, but it belongs to a German company, so it's mostly populated by German-speaking people who lives there in the north of Argentina. And in the performance we have this mixture in between German, Swiss and Austrian actors together with Argentinians and some people from everywhere. So at a certain point we have this mixture of languages, but also this mixture in between of the approach of how to perform those stories. That was also an interesting experience and challenge for me as a director. I'm very much interested in that mixture. At the beginning, I was a little bit reluctant, I have to admit, because in my experience, I don't know, I'm not always super fan of those performance who looks like the UN, like where you have like different experiences. And for me, sometimes they seems like they're not achieving something new in that mixer. I don't know if we succeed in that either, but at least I have the impression that we have a couple of scenes where that contamination, that friction in between different ways of representation or different theatrical traditions is created something interesting. Yeah, it's true. That's one of the things that I didn't have that much time to reflect yet. But today we were rehearsing one of the scenes where we have this mixture in between German and Argentinian actors. And at a certain point, they were talking on stage in Spanish, English, and German, and they were get along and improvising a bit. And it was one of those very lively moments that we are always searching for while making a piece. That's interesting. I actually don't remember exactly how I came out with the sentence of the people wearing masks in the streets, but I mean, it's true that Diamante was created in a very particular moment of the world and specifically of Latin America, because in the last 2-3 years we have been seeing an extreme turn over into the right-wing parties, a little bit different than what's going on in Europe, where you also have right-wing parties, but in Latin America they are more connected with neoliberal policies, and the dramatic thing is that they're winning, they are taking power. If you think of what's going on right now in Brazil with Bolsonaro, which is a neo-fascist government, or I mean, yesterday there was a coup d'etat in Bolivia. The protests that erupt in Chile, and we in Argentina, we are still with a right-wing government with strong neoliberal policies again, who are heading the country into a huge crisis. And basically what they are doing is like making bigger the gap in between classes, and they are making bigger and bigger the difference in between people who has privilege and people who has nothing. And that's also why the phenomenon of gate communities, of closed private cities, it's quite big right now in Latin America, because the wealthy people are secluding themselves from the rest of the society, and the privatization of the public sphere, the privatization of the public life, it's, I think, stronger than ever. I never seen before such power in hands of private companies. Has never been so clear than before, than governments are just puppets of big private companies with very specific interests in countries in Latin America. So for me, the whole idea of talking about a company town or a free private city, it was also very much connected to what's politically going on in Latin America. So probably many of the literary sentences who are, spread all around the piece are also connected to my feelings in these recent years. Well, that's a very good question. What's the power of fiction? I think it's very complex, because we are all built by fictions. That's my impression, in the sense that we create the fiction that we create fiction, but it's actually just the opposite. The fictions are the ones who are creating us, because we are all behaving and reacting the way the fictions have taught us to be. You know, we are all the way that the movies, the books and the bad TV are made us. So it's always a complex relationship. And if you think about in recent years, the power of social media and the way that we all create a fiction of ourselves, the way we all present ourselves and our ordinary life, it's also like a constant creation of fiction. Before that, it was more like we were all creating certain fictions in the sense that we were transforming our past every time that we retell it, but now we are creating our reality all the time. And there's also some political clashes that are really based on the construction of different storytellings, of different narrations that are imposed to us. But that said, of course, I do believe that that the creation of fictions, it implies a strong hope. I do believe that that the idea of a possible different utopia, or a possible way to live, to relate with life and the world, it comes also from fiction. I don't know if fiction is going to save anything, or is going to change anything concrete in a short-term basis. But I do believe that fiction creates new perspectives that they were not there before. Yeah, I think unfortunately these are going to be the last performances of Diamante. It's a very complex and difficult and expensive piece to make. I think we were lucky enough to being able to perform it in Duisburg, in Vienna, and now in Berlin. We wanted to do a version in Buenos Aires, but with the current political and economic situation, it's going to be impossible. So you never know, but it looks like it's going to be the last chance to see Diamante live.